war operations, I know the names of. The war, I mean, essentially it's the global war on terror.
Right. What operations were you involved with?
Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, and a small part in Horn of Africa.
And what branch of the service are you in?
The Connecticut Air National Guard.
And your rank right now, Josh?
Master Sergeant, E7.
How did you get in the service?
I joined right out of high school. I was 17 when I joined, so I had to get my parents' permission. I was looking for, I guess, a way to jumpstart my career. Looking to go to school, looking to do all these other things. And back in 2000, joining the military was like a safe bet. No one thought anything was going to happen. So I was like, yeah, I'll do this, and I'll learn a small little skill, and then I'll be able to pay for college and all that other stuff. So then I started talking to recruiters, and they were like, I took my ASVABs, and they wanted me to do something else besides being a food service technician or a cook. And I was like, nope, I want to be a cook. So
You wanted to be a cook?
yeah. So I wanted to be a cook, and it was the shortest tech school, and for me that was it hit all the all the pegs that I was looking for. I wanted a short tech school, get in, do my time, get my tuition waiver, and do the whole 9 yards. And so I was talking to the recruiter, and he's like, I'm not letting you be a cook based on your ASVAB scores. And I was like, okay, well, so what's going to happen now? He's like, well, you have to pick another career field. I'm like, well, I don't want to pick another career field. So we had a parting of ways, and about a month and a half later, he called me back, and he's like, you still want to be a cook? And I was like, yes, I want to be a cook. So then they took me in as a cook.
They did. And what year was that?
That was 2000, so June 27th, 2000.
Did you have prior experience with cooking? Why were you attracted to cooking?
I think that was part of why I was attracted to it, is that, so at this point, my parents had become divorced, and there was a lot of pressure on my dad. He was working long hours. So, we figured things out in the kitchen, but it was one of those things where I was like, well, why don't I go learn how to do this so that I'm not, starving every night. So I figure instead of eating, what is it, SpaghettiOs and, burning steak all the time, let's get a little bit of a skill under my belt. So
Why did you pick the National Guard, not another branch?
I actually looked into the Army, the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard was full at the time. They weren't really taking. I went to the Army Guard, and no offense, Army, I wasn't impressed. There was a lot of the recruiter and I weren't on the same page. So I was like, okay, well, I don't want to do that. And actually, I was talking to my pastor about joining the military. He's like, well, have you looked at the Air Guard? And I was like, I don't even know what the Air Guard is. Do they have such a thing? So come to find out, they do. And I went and talked to my guidance counselor, and she linked me up with, I think it was Tech Sergeant Ivan. I can't remember his last name, but it was Ivan. I remember that. And he came to the high school, and we started talking, and that's how I got into the Air Guard.
Once you joined, were you inducted immediately and started your service?
Yeah, so I elected to do the drills here while I was not in uniform. So I was
Meaning East Granby, the Air National Guard base?
Yeah. So when I first joined, they had a kind of like a student flight that was starting to come into existence, where they were taking a lot of their new recruits and putting them into a program that kind of gave them a heads up, like, this is what the military is all about. These are the different types of benefits that are accorded to you. These are, what the acronyms mean, things like that. So it was very basic. So after doing a couple drill weekends with that, then they sent me to actually go work in the kitchen, where they were going to teach me some basic knife skills or cutting pies. And actually, that's the longest running joke. A friend of mine, we both enlisted at the same time roughly, and we were both in student flight together. And whenever things get going, tough, we always look at each other and we're always like, hey man, want to go back just to cutting pies? Because we cut so many pies. I mean, so many pies.
What was your training? So now they're training you to cook. What was your training like in the kitchen? Like how many hours, how many weeks?
On the drill weekends, we were in there at 7 and we weren't done till 3. So it was more kind of just acting like a sponge, taking a look at what was going on, trying to not get run over as people were moving around really quickly. Because I think that was the biggest help, is understanding how quickly and how fast the kitchen can move. Um, and then it was starting to get into like the discipline and how the military culture worked. And at that point, like I said, we were it was a new student flight. It wasn't really something that the base we had embraced fully yet. So there was like a look of, well, we don't know what to do with these guys necessarily, so let's just keep them busy, which worked out well because we were always busy. That's one thing I remember, is always being busy. And by the time that 3 o'clock rolled around, and we're ready to go, my feet really hurt because we were standing and running around doing minor jobs the whole time.
How long was your training for basic training for the air guard?
Basic training was 6 weeks for me.
And was that right here in East Granby?
No, that was at Lackland Air Force Base, San Antonio, Texas.
And what was that like? What did they teach you?
I think the biggest thing for me for basic training and what they taught me was attention to detail. That was the biggest takeaway. Um, Discipline, all that stuff. One of the things that really stuck with me at basic training was they said, we are not teaching you anything you don't already know. You know how to do this. You just need to have the discipline to force yourself to maintain it. So that and the catchwords like attention to detail, move with a purpose, things like that, really kind of stuck with me. So I really did feel like they weren't teaching me how to do this stuff. It was more or less me coming out and learning how to embrace it on my own. I hated basic training though. It was terrible. And for as much as other branches, go back and forth, basic training for Air Force really isn't that difficult. But it's one of those things where it is mentally tough, and any type of mental challenge that you overcome can be stressful. So I just didn't like the way that it unfolded. But and then I ended up getting really sick the last week there too, so that didn't help. I was on bed rest for like 3 days. Yeah.
Oh, what did you have?
Probably the same thing I have now, upper respiratory infection. So, but I remember it was really bad to the point where I was having a hard time paying attention, and the walls were changing colors, and I was like hallucinating. It was really bad. So we had to go to the medics, and they put me on bed rest. But
do you remember any of your instructors?
We called him Sergeant Slaughter. I can't remember his name, but
Sergeant Slaughter?
yeah, he was. I remember the way he looks. He had those deep set eyes, where it was like his eyes were inside of his socket, really far. So when he stared at you, he looked like he was staring at you from far away. And he was bald, and he was a psychology major, so he kind of like played games with us a lot. And I picked up on that right away. I was like, oh man, he's really trying to get a rile out of some people. So he wasn't a big guy, and he wasn't intimidating physically, but he was very intimidating with what he said and how he did it. And so yeah, I don't remember his name, but I definitely remember him.
After graduation from basic training, where did you go?
Actually, just went across the highway there to the Medina Annex in Lackland Air Force Base, where we did our services training.
And what was that?
The services training was the food service part of what we did. So we learned how expeditionary kitchens work, mortuary affairs, lodging, fitness, morale, wellness, and recreation, all that stuff that rolls up into the services component at the time. And that was interesting because it was like kind of like living in a dorm in college, and I had never been to college at this point, so that was the first experience where I had being able to live, in a dorm setting with roommates, with communal bathrooms and things like that, and communal day areas. So it was an interesting experience.
How long was that training?
That was another 6 weeks, 6.5 weeks, I think, total, with administrative time.
So was that more like college living than barracks living?
It kind of was, yeah.
Did you
Because
have like classes during the day?
Yep.
And you were free at night to
we had classes during the day. We were free at night. We had restrictions within limits, mandatory physical training time, um, mandatory cleaning time, things like that. Um, we were roomed with only one other person, so we had our own room, like with two people to a room, one communal um, TV room area, the communal bathrooms, and then downstairs we had like the where the I guess an RA would reside, but it was more like we call it QC, yeah QC, um, and they were awake 24/7 in case somebody needed to get a hold of somebody inside the building. So yeah, it's actually very much like dorm living.
After your services training, where did you go?
So after services training, I came back here to Connecticut and uh, tried to enroll in school at that point. And then I just decided that I was going to do my drill weekends, and nothing really big happened after that. I think it was just going to drill weekends and getting better at what I do. Getting my 3 level. No, I had my 3 level. Getting my 5 level at that point, which is the next step for someone in the Air Force to do on the job training and craft their skills so that they can be more competent where they don't need supervision. And then I decided to, like I said, enroll in school, but I had missed the semester because I came back in May, I think it was. Because I went to basic training in February.
2001?
Yes, May of 2001 I came back. So I didn't get to go to school until the fall of 2001.
And where did you go to school?
Originally went to Quinnebog Valley Community College out in Danielson.
And is that when you were attending and going to drill weekends when
Yep.
9/11?
Yes.
Do you recall where you were?
Yeah, actually, it's kind of a funny story, but I woke up and it was like about 8 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, 8 o'clock in the morning. I was getting myself like a bowl of cereal, and I just turned on the TV just because, and sat on the couch, and I was just watching the news, and all of a sudden, everything broke. There was no more TV at that point. It was all about news, and I just remember seeing footage of a plane flying into the building. I was like, what is that? So I was like, okay, I'm going to keep watching this. And then as I watched it, then the realization started to unfold. It was like, oh, okay, somebody's flying planes into these buildings. And my first thought wasn't that it was, a terrorist attack or we're under attack or anything like that. I was just like, whoa, that's crazy. Someone just flew planes into the building. So as things started to unfold, it was probably like 11 o'clock when all the information started rolling in. I was like, oh, wow, this could be like going to war. So my dad calls me and he's like, dude, did you when watching the news? I'm like, yeah. He goes, you better pack your bags, man. You're going to war. And I was like, I kind of chuckled. I was like, yeah, thanks, Dad. and I knew that it was him like responding because he was about ready to see a potential for his son to go to war. And I'm like, all right, you know what? So I called the base and I was like, what's going on? And they're like, well, we don't know anything yet, so we'll keep you in the loop. I was like, okay, yeah, keep me in the loop. And then, it kind of subsided. The initial shock and impact of it happening was like everybody was still trying to figure out what was going on. And then I think it was, a good year before we actually mobilized or did anything. So for that entire year, we were just like, okay, now we got to take this thing seriously. Now we have to come on drill weekends, and it was a whole new reset, like a sense of purpose that really honed and signified what we were going to do. And it was like school was now on the back burner a little bit mentally because I was like, oh, I don't want to commit 100% to all these classes if all of a sudden I have to go. So, and then over the course of the year, we kind of forgot because we were getting ready to do all this stuff, and then nothing really happened. So we're like, okay, well, is anything ever going to happen with it? And then it was like January of 2002, I think it was, we all got pulled aside on a drill weekend, and it was just 9 of us, which, thinking back now, I was like, oh, that's a very specific number, which is a number that, corresponded to the very specific package of people that was being sent over. And I was like, all right. So we got pulled aside, and they're like, okay, so this is what's happening. You've all been selected to deploy overseas. And they're like, nobody knows we're doing this. Nobody knows we're going. It hasn't even come out on the news yet. But there's a mobilization happening, and we're like, whoa, this is really happening.
Why were you selected?
Well,
Were you a cook at this point?
yes, yeah, I was a senior airman, so I was an E4, and it was probably because I had that renewed sense of purpose. It was like I would always iron my uniform. I always came to drill looking as sharp as I could. I was always eager to help. I was always trying to, get to the next stage and to do the next thing that I needed to do to become more proficient and become more self-sufficient. So the people that were selected were honestly, I want to say, the best people that they could have sent. That was their A team, and then there was a B team that was on standby, and it was comprised of, I think, people that had other types of conflicts or issues that were coming up. People who had just had a new baby or this or that, so we didn't want to necessarily send them. So we got selected, and from there it was pretty quick. I think it was like 2 weeks. They said, you got to be ready to go in less than 2 weeks. So, go home, tell your family, don't tell anyone else, but your family has to know.
Did you know where you were going exactly?
No, we didn't.
Did you even know that it was Iraq?
No, it wasn't. Well, we knew that it was going to be overseas. It was going to be in the desert. We didn't know where in the desert. So that didn't come out until probably our orders were cut 3 days before we left. We found out where we were actually going. But that was part of that career field. That career field specifically, we had to be ready to go within, I think it's 22 hours. Actually, sorry, that's active duty, 28 hours for guard. So we got an extra 6 hours. Woo. But we had to be ready to go because we were part of bare base buildup. So when civil engineers went in and leveled everything, they started building things. We were then the ones who else set up lodging, set up the contracts for the food service, and made sure that all of those life support systems for general, hospitality and general quality of life were in place and ready to go, so that we could actually put together a real base. And that was probably the best experience from that career field that I could have ever had.
Where did you actually end up?
We ended up in Jordan.
You were in Jordan and you were setting up a base there?
Yeah.
What was the name of it?
I honestly don't remember. Yeah.
What can you tell me?
No, I remember.
How big was it and what was the purpose?
I don't know how big it was. The name of it was, I think, Azrak. We used to call it Ascrack because it was pretty terrible. It was just the middle of the desert. I don't know the purpose. I know we had fighters. I think it was F-15s, F-16s, but we didn't really know what the purpose of that was. So whatever a fighter does, I'm pretty sure we can figure that out. So that's what that base was doing.
And how long were you stationed there?
It was 125 days in country. Yeah, about that.
So you were busy setting up the base and help setting up, but you weren't cooking?
No, we actually had we contracted that out to third country nationals. So we would maintain the contract end of that aspect. So we would watch them, make sure they were cooking it properly within health standards, making sure that they were doing things safely, that they weren't, we've had situations where they thought they were being smart and they put the eggs in the night before and leave them in the warmer, and then the next day, 8 hours later, they'd come in and try and serve them, and we're like, no, we can't do that. They're green. They're turning green and they were trying to argue with us, no, those are good eggs, and we're like, no, that's not how that goes. So that was kind of interesting because we weren't actually doing our job, but we had to kind of step up and get other people that we didn't even know, that we weren't working with, that were from a different country with different languages, to try and get them to do our job. Largely because I think it was cheaper. We had 30 third country nationals cooking, and a shift of 2 people watching them 24 hours. So it was a way of reducing manpower requirements.
When you first arrived, was there nothing there? No base? Did you have to set it up from scratch, or was there any structures there already?
There were 2 buildings, so that's it. And they were hangar buildings, basically giant warehouses. So you'll see in some of the pictures there, we had to cram everybody living in this giant 300-foot, like it's basically the size of a football field roughly, and it was covered. And I remember walking in, and there's like insulation exposed on the inside of the building, and you're just looking at it, and you're like, oh great, So there's dust all over the floor, and we had to just kind of like move everybody in there for the time being.
Is that where you slept?
Yeah, probably for a good, man, I want to say a good month and a half.
In just this one big open building?
Yeah, it was.
Top?
Yep, I think the maximum number of people we had in there was like 680. We had to go through with a stick that was 3 feet and another stick that was 2 feet to make sure that everyone's cots were spaced properly apart. And it was it was really a crappy job to do because people were sleeping in all different hours, and if someone's cot was moved, you had to move it, and if they were on it, and it was a recipe for conflict. So, but you just did it. You had to do what you had to do. So we had to make sure that everyone was flipped, head to toe to prevent disease. So it was all these really minutia things that we had to figure out just to make sure that you could cram 680 people in this one building. Because the other building next to it, we had to set up command centers and all that stuff because there's no place to put anybody. And then that's when we started working with contracting office, start bringing in temporary buildings, start getting other buildings built, tents. Once tents started to roll in, and civil engineering helped put them up. We put them up. Basically, whatever hands were available were shifting focus and building the space up. $250,000 worth of white rock was put down just to kind of level things out. So, yeah, we basically built, I think it was close to 110 temporary tent facilities over in a location that was like offset from the base.
When you first got there and there was only those 2 buildings, what did you do for Metro? What did you guys do about a kitchen or anything?
So, interesting thing is that we actually were able to use one of our expeditionary kitchens. It was called the Harvest Falcon. And it was a tent inside of a Connex box that had all the appropriate cooking equipment like stoves and tilt grills and steamers and all that other stuff. So we deployed with that. Well, not from the guard here, but that was already in place when we got there, and we set it up. That was one of our first functions, and it was we built it. We built everything, to be honest with you.
Now, were you 9 guys from the Connecticut Air National Guard, the only ones from Connecticut, and you went with soldiers from all over, or airmen from all over?
No, I think we were just the first. We were the first wave, which is appropriate for that job position at that time. It was the first in, and it's usually the last out. Aside from a few others, like when we got there, Talsi was there, some Red Horse guys from civil engineering and security forces. So we were the first from this base to leave, and then I don't know how many came after us, but then it was other people from our base coming, and we had some disaster preparedness guys, and then all of a sudden we started moving around. Like once we got there, some people were going forward, some people were going other places. I think most people from Connecticut ended up moving on downrange, and only I think a handful of maybe 20. I think it was security. Like the initial push from the base was the initial people who stayed in that location. So I had some security forces friends there, disaster preparedness, like I was saying. I think that was it. Maybe a couple CE guys,
So
but
you stayed at that base for your entire
Yep.
time in Jordan?
did, yes.
Well, so once you got more buildings built and tents out, how did your daily life change? Did you then get some kind of barracks or better sleeping quarters?
No, it was racked and stacked. So we were actually in charge of lodging. And it's kind of funny because at first, there's certain benefits, like when you're in a certain career field, you kind of get fringe benefits. When you're in charge of lodging, you would think that you get good lodging, but we really had to kind of rack and stack the importance of other missions. There was a lot of special forces that were moving through that area, so we needed to make sure that the trailers were set aside for them. Something that we gladly did. The new tents, because I think the idea was that if we bide our time, we'll go for the really nice location, a nice lodging. So we were giving people, new lodging as it were, and we were one of the last ones to leave the K-span. That's what we called it, the K-span, which is that giant building. One of the last ones to leave that K-span to a tent, and we tried to keep all of our Connecticut services folk together. So we put all 12 of us, or 9 of us in there, plus 3 others. So that was our tent, and then from there, then we saw the construction of all these permanent buildings, like they were called. What are they like? They were just concrete pads with like white aluminum on the outside, and that's it. It was kind of just like a little bit more better than a tent. So once all those were constructed, then we were like, we're first, and we moved into those ones. We got the pick of, pick out whatever we wanted from there. So, but eventually it was. We moved up in lodging standards. So as the base became more robust, money was flowing into it. There was a need for it. We had more people coming. There was new solutions for different types of, just new lodging solutions. So we just kind of like moved up. And finally got out of the K-span, out of 10, and moved into a hardened structure.
How did you stay in touch with your family? Were you allowed to even?
Yes. So it's kind of funny because I always make this, being now in a leadership position, Facebook's easy. I mean, I deployed again in 2007, and that was like you could use Facebook, social media, email, everything. So back in 2003, communication was very spotty. We had one morale tent. We got 15-minute time, and you were supposed to only get like 1 or 2 calls a week, but they were pretty good at, if they're not gonna say no, you can't call home. But if there was people in line, then you were like, okay, maybe I'll call tomorrow because I already called yesterday. So you let other people do their thing. If you had access to a phone, like for your job, which I did, then I could use a calling card. And so at some point they did end up sending up like a morale line where we could call them to the base and they would send us out, but that was only one line. So if everybody was doing it, so you had the opportunity to call back home, kind of like whenever you wanted, but it was one of those things where in a way it was tough to do so because you're like, I got to focus on what I'm doing now. And if I got to keep explaining to people at home where they're like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, I can't tell you. Where are you? I can't tell you. Oh, so what else is going on? Oh, nah, not much. It's like, okay. So we did get phone calls and email. I think email was the biggest one.
So you had internet over there?
Yes. Yeah, we had to have internet. So at this point, a lot of the systems that the Air Force had still operated on having an internet connection. So it took a while for us to get it because initially we were, without it for probably a good month. And everything had to be done manually, but we did end up getting internet.
So walk me through what a typical day would be like from when you get up until you go to bed at night.
Well, I worked night shift for most of it. I think the first month and a half was on day shift. But it was weird because you woke up, you didn't really need an alarm clock. You just kind of woke up. I don't know if you were really sleeping all that well anyways, just because it was a foreign environment and there's people next to you, people waking up at all different hours. So you just kind of like, you woke up, and when you look over and you realize that, your supervisor's up, you're like, well, I might as well be up too. So you just kind of like mosey on out, go and, shave, take a shower if you could. Kind of had to limit showers we were allowed to take. Being in food services, if we were in the kitchen, we were allowed to take a shower every day, which was nice, which was a commodity that other people didn't have, but it was a health precaution. So if you had the opportunity to take a shower, you take a shower, and then you mustered and you tried to figure out what was on the agenda for the day. Because from our aspect, especially in the Air Force, a lot of the stuff is done behind the scenes. We're not like the Army where we're outside the wire. We're doing a lot of that stuff, but we're very structured and organized and bureaucratic, almost to a fault. I remember getting into a fight with our acting first shirt at the time because my pen was in my pocket here, and the regulation states that it can't go over the name tape, and it's the only pen I got. It's the only pen I had out there. I mean, there's not really a whole lot, and the pen was sticking out, and I was like, "You're gonna bust me up about my pen right now?" And I kind of lost it at that point. But there's little things like that would affect you throughout the day. So, like I was saying, a lot of stuff happens behind the scenes. So, it's like you're running a regular base. It's like you're in garrison most of the time. You're operating under the same conditions. Doesn't matter if it's wartime or in garrison, in peacetime. You are expected to be Air Force. So we get up, adhere to the 9 to 5 as much as we possibly could, and I think it was 12-hour shifts and 7 days a week. So it just increased the workload. We were always available, which is fine because there was nothing else really to do.
That's my next question. What did you do in the little bit of downtime you had?
Well, I brought a Nintendo Game Boy, so I played that. So, yeah, so there's people who brought, they brought their music or they brought books. But everything was music was really the big thing. It's like put your headphones off or put your headphones on and tune the world out type deal. So especially at nighttime, because there's so many people in that case band, you could not sleep without having something take your attention away from everything else on. Because there were so many people that had to leave lights on just so that other people could see what they're doing, because that was their time off. Because you had rotating shifts constantly. Other than that, we finally eventually ended up getting a gym. It was put underneath a tent. So that was packed. I mean, there was nothing else for anybody to do but work out or, read a book or play on a game that they brought or listen to music. We started to get to the point, though, where that stuff started losing value. It was just like, okay, I'm bored with that. So we started to find other ways to entertain ourselves. And I think the biggest way was to decorate your area, was to make home out of your little spot. So we would take MRE boxes and we'd tape them together and make furniture out of them. We would go around the base and try and find one man's trash is another man's treasure. We'd find bits and pieces of broken wood or whatever, and we would just construct areas, try and find as much 550 cord as we possibly could, and construct hanging baskets for all of our toiletries and stuff. And it was just about decorating your area. And at one point they replaced all of the cots with actual bunk beds. This is where they were able to up the capacity to almost 680 people. So beforehand it was 300. Oh, we're smart, let's bring in bunk beds. It's okay. So at that point, then you were putting sheets around it and you were building out your little apartment, and that became something to do. It was you were trying to chunk out of this massive chaos. I hate to say it, but to me it looked like Chinatown in a way, where there was string going everywhere, and there was blankets hanging and towels hanging, and it looked like a giant chaotic mess. And the only way that you could make sense of it was to cut your piece out of it and section yourself off from everybody else around you. So that was something that occupied a lot of our time.
Did you have any USO shows or any entertainers come in?
Eventually we did. Once the base started to get really, there's a lot of people there. We're in the middle of, supporting Operation Iraqi Freedom. I think we were a contributor to some of the shock and awe. So once we had a lot of people there, we then took and started our MWR function. So we were authorized to go off base and purchase all the beer. People were allowed to have 2 beers a day. Morale, wellness, and recreation. So my supervisor at the time was Staff Sergeant Gregory Jones, which is the individual that we mentioned before. He, him and Tech Sergeant Doug Shirey were in charge of the bar area, and it became a hit. They were also doing, they had this puppet routine, and I know it sounds stupid, but it was honestly the best thing that at that point, you're very limited in what you have access to. So we had not like an open mic night, but it was kind of like a talent night, and we do it every so often. I think it was probably every 10 days or every week or so. We did that for about 4 weeks, and we had people who deployed with their instruments, their bass guitars and all that other stuff, and they, we just had them on stage. So we created our own form of entertainment, and they would take a black boot sock and a white tennis sock, and they would just go back and forth behind the scene, like behind this little setup, like a wall, and they would rag on each other, or they would make fun of the guy who was on the stage doing their thing, and it honestly was a hit. I mean, it drew people into the K-Span because, like I was saying, it was an administrative building at this time. Moving people in there in hundreds. It was just everybody was there to see this puppet show, and it was all ad lib. They made everything up on the spot, but it was fun. It was really, really fun. Yeah, and then as for USO shows, I think we had one. I don't know if I went to it though. Like I said, I was working nights, so it was tough for me to get to some of the day things.
Did you have enough supplies, food, all the materials you needed? Were there shortages of anything?
Well, eventually there ended up being a shortage of MRE boxes, because once people caught on that you could make your furniture out of MRE boxes, then that started to get really scarce, and we ended up having to trade, furniture. In terms of food, at first it was you had MREs, and those little packets, man. You think that there's not enough food in them at first, but it was getting to the point where we're like, we only need to eat 2 of these a day, because we'd get one for every meal period, and it was just way too much food. I mean, they're packed with calories. I mean, they're looking at. I think they're designed. If you eat 3 of them, it's for like a 10,000, 12,000 calorie day diet. So it's like, it's just too much. It's just too much food. But we would trade, commodities inside the MRE packets. We'd open them up. If there were Skittles in there, then we knew we could trade it for something else. And then the care packages started coming in. And once the care packages came in, there was no need for candies or basically whatever you wanted was right there. Eventually, AFIs ended up coming to the base. So there was a small base exchange. So there was never a need for any of that type of stuff. I think in the beginning, deodorants, shaving creams, those things where people weren't sure how much they should bring, and it weren't exactly issued to you because they weren't life-sustaining. Those things were hard to get. And that's where you could sell, the Skittles for a toothbrush if you wanted to. So there was a little bit of that going on. But eventually, I think after the second month when AFIs came in, I think we bought everything out of AFIs in the first week, and they were like, they had nothing else to sell, so they had to keep bringing stuff in, largely because there was that. AFIs, Army Air Force Exchange Service. So we basically bought the shop head out. There was nothing left in it. There was just like nothing left because it was new, it was there, and it was like, we got this money, we're making deployment money, and we got all this hazardous duty pay or danger pay and family separation, and we're like, oh, we haven't read this magazine ever, but I'm going to start now because it's something new. It's like, so it was the novelty of it being there. We basically cleared the shelves in that place, and then they're like, well, we're not going to get another shipment again for a couple weeks, so you guys are just going to have to make do. So
how close was the base to other towns in Georgia?
There was nothing out there.
Nothing, so there wasn't a town nearby?
We had to, I got off base a couple times on beer runs. We had to go get beer for the bar, so we were allowed to go off base in civilian clothing and discreetly purchase. I don't know how you discreetly purchase an entire van full of beer, but especially in a predominantly Muslim country where drinking is, it's illegal, but it's not exactly condoned. So we'd have to go to this one location that was, we were authorized to buy, beer from them, and we could only buy beer. We couldn't buy any hard liquor or anything like that. So we roll up in our civilian clothing and definitely looked out of place. And we're like, we'd like all your beer, please. It was very interesting. So that took like an hour to drive to. So we weren't really near anything. In fact, it was mostly desert. To the point where we were hit by sandstorms all the time. So there really wasn't anything around to kind of block it.
So what would a sandstorm be like?
It was, so I saw it coming, and I said to myself, this is the only time that you're ever going to be in a sandstorm. So put your goggles on and embrace it. So I ran out of my tent, and I had I wrapped my face, I put my goggles on, I was like, let's see how this thing, because I really just wanted to experience being in a sandstorm. It's literally like getting hit with sandpaper. Yeah, it stings, it tears, tears all the dead skin off you. I was picking sand out of my teeth for a while. I mean, at this point, I think I'm 20. Yeah, I'm like 20 years old, maybe 19. And it was just like, I want to experience this in the most probably stupid way possible. It wasn't a good idea.
Were you the only guy out there?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I could say that I was the only guy out there in the storm in the sleeping area in the new tent city because I was working night shifts, so there's not many people who were working nights. So when I stepped out, I was like, "Yep, I'm the only one." Everyone else was running for cover.
After your 125 days in Jordan, where did you go?
I came back to the base, and we were kept on our CED orders to do back support. I don't know what CED stands for. It's just a type of order that we have. But that's what they're saying. They were going to keep us on orders to, help with transitioning, bringing other people back home, doing miscellaneous tasks.
Was it 2004 by then?
No, it was still. I think it was like May through July. It was back here.
But you were still
in Connecticut.
Active duty. So
Yes.
You were here every day, full time.
Yes. Yep. And then those orders ended, I think, roughly around like the end of July.
And what did you do at the end of July?
Well, at that point, I had missed another semester of school, so I waited. Actually, I bought a couch and a Jeep. That was what I did. So I got home and I was like, man, I really want a Jeep. So I went and I bought a Jeep. And the best advice I can give to any serviceman when they come home is don't buy a car. Don't buy a car. It's a waste of money. It really is. It's one of those things where it's like, because you want to buy it cash, you want to buy a fancy car, you want to buy a fast car, you want to buy this car that's gonna, personify yourself, and just you spend all this time away from your family. It's like, don't buy a car. Go do something else. It's just some things I've learned. It's not worth it because cars they're not. You sink money into them, they depreciate in value constantly, and you just kind of have to look at it and watch your deployment money go away. And it's just, don't buy a car.
After July, were you back on the normal
Yep.
weekend at lunch?
Yep. Went back to school, started doing the drill weekend thing again. At this point, I was trying to get my associates in fine arts. Realized I wasn't going to make any money doing that, so I kind of shifted gears to I don't even know where I went at that point. I think it was Asnuntuck. Yeah, Asnuntuck Community College, because it was a little bit closer. So it was a bunch of transition periods. Tried to get jobs here, like at Media Play, Sears, just odd jobs, trying to basically just pay the bills while I went to school. But I was getting the GI Bill kicker, so I wasn't really interested in staying with a job that I didn't like. So it was easy for me to just bounce from job to job because the going to school actually paid for a lot of the bills.
When was the next time that you were deployed?
So I went on a small little deployment. Well, I've been on a couple TDYs, temporary duties. I went to Airman Leadership School so that I could get my staff sergeant stripe. I went to a deployment for training, which was, I think, roughly 22 or 23 days in Italy. So at this point, I was really just embracing the guard aspect of the guard, which was, doing the 1 weekend a month, but taking all the additional duties that I could possibly take. And then I think in around 2006, they offered an opportunity to volunteer to deploy again. And they were looking for a library manager in El Dhafra, which is in the United Arab Emirates. So I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll deploy for 6 months being a library manager. So they had to send me to school to learn how to use the library system, how to become a librarian, for lack of a better term. And then that was about 2 weeks, I think it was. And then I came back, and
How long were you there?
that was, you talking about the deployment or the school? Yeah.
How long did school take?
It was like about 2 weeks. I think it was 2
And
weeks
then
in
how
Andrews.
long were you deployed?
And then that was for another 4 months. And that same time frame, I think, was like January to May.
January to May, you were a librarian?
Yeah.
You went from being a cook to a librarian?
Yeah. The same career field, but yeah.
How did you like that?
It was really cool at first. The novelty kind of wore off after a while, because I was the only one, so I had to manage my own shop, and so I set my own hours, but I had to make sure my hours were, I was open long enough so that people could actually use it in a 24-hour operation.
Were
So.
you located on an American Air Force base?
Mm-hmm. Yep, Aldafra is an American Air Force base that we have there currently. I'm pretty sure that we sent people there before. Yeah.
So all your patrons were servicemen that were on
Yes.
the base?
Yep. Yep.
Did they use the library a lot?
Yep. They did. This was still before. This is still before the big social media push. So that wasn't like a really big thing yet. But most people's entertainment came from more limited sources. So we had to have like a morale drive set up where it had movies on it. I checked out DVDs. We checked out books. I worked with the education office to get certain reference books for the Dantes and Kleps courses, which we signed out music and CD format. So it was just a place for people to go and get media, essentially. I started to increase and expand it with video games and computer games and things like that. So we had an whole section set aside for people to rent those types of games. And then really it was supposed to be part of a learning resource center also. So like I said, we do the Dantes and Klep stuff with education office. And then we would do videos that we'd send home, very much in the same setup that we have here, where I would operate that video. They would make a message, and we would pay for the postage and send it home for them. So it was kind of like just a place that you can go and relax a little bit. I had couches and chairs and things set up in there. There was coffee downstairs, so it was more like just a place of quiet and relaxation.
So the living conditions must have been much better. This was one of our big,
Yes.
well-established bases. So
Buildings everywhere. Yep, we had
3 meals
dorms,
a day,
3 meals.
3 meals.
Yep. Everything was catered in a way. Again, it was cooked by third country nationals, mostly I think Filipinos.
So it was cooked in both restaurants, cooked by locals.
Mm-hmm.
Did you teach them American recipes and use American menus, or did they cook local?
Tried to teach them American food. So in services, we have like a worldwide menu. It's a very specific menu that we rotate. So the food that we purchase is designed to be used for that. And it's very interesting to see how someone from a different culture takes the same type of meat that we are saying, oh, this is going to be used for like chicken cordon bleu. And he's like, no, shawarma. He just does his own thing and just puts it all together. And he's just like, okay, that's what they cooked. And you can't really do anything about it at that point because they're already on a roll, and you can try and stop them all you want, but they can only cook what they know. You can only teach them so much. So we ate a lot of interesting food items. The first time around was very interesting food items. And the second time around, we had a little bit more control over it.
Do you have any memorable experiences from your time at the United Airlines?
Yeah, it was a kind of a different setting. It was completely juxtaposed against the first time that we went down there. I expected it to be very similar, almost Wild West, like it was before, and it wasn't. It was very structured. It was, it was like a regular Air Force base, and that being, the situation, I was able to do a lot more. And I was a staff sergeant at this time, so I had already been through, some leadership training, and I was really eager to kind of like push myself into the next level of my Air Force career. So yeah, there was a lot of really fun stuff that I got to do on that base. I got to actually, I don't have those. I gotta get those pictures for you, but I got to ride camel. I kissed the camel. I probably shouldn't have done that, but it was again one of those stupid things. When you're young, you're like, "Watch this! I'm going to do this," And we did that. We went sand dune riding. So we took the air out of the tires in one of the Land Cruisers and were able to take that out in the sand dunes. We went to, we were always able to go downtown on our one day off. So I went to different malls. I ended up having like a shoulder issue, so I got to go off base a lot to do physical therapy while I was there. I got to paint our emblem on one of the major rocks that they had outside. So it was like I was just putting myself out there. I was just doing all these really fun things, largely because I had the opportunity to do them, which was very, very different than the first time around. I had a lot of time to do things that I wanted to do. Designing coins, and because I was saying I was going to school for fine arts, so I was trying to use my drawing abilities and my art skills to improve the base, or improve everyone else's experience too at the same time. So I did a lot of designing of coins, designing of different types of localized marketing and cartoons and things like that. So very, very different.
So you were a staff sergeant at this point. How was that different for you now being an officer yourself?
Well, I was still a non-commissioned officer at that time. Now I am a senior non-commissioned officer. So back when you're like an E5, E6, or an E4, and even some branches, you're expected to hold down a project, or you're expected to hold down a small shop, and at the same time be proficiently skilled in doing that. Now, I'm expected to hold down a much larger scope of a group of people, but the technical expertise is not required. There's a lot of other people that can do that job for me. So the current career field I'm in now, which is air transportation, because this is my third career field. I switched from services to public affairs to air transportation. Now, if I were to ever deploy in this capacity, it would be managing problems, managing issues, managing workflow operations, and not necessarily worrying about, oh, I got a problem with inputting this ISBN, which is the international book number, into the system, and it's giving me an error code. Like I don't care about that. I gotta move on and do other things. So the deployment functionality from my end would be completely different at this point.
Back when you were a librarian, so that's still considered services?
Yes.
When did you move to communication?
About 2008. So after I got back, I had really felt like, okay, I did everything in services that services is going to have to offer. Come to find out, that was false. Because just shortly after that, when I switched to public affairs, the whole Haiti thing happened. The earthquakes in Haiti. And our services folks were sent down to do search and recovery and mortuary affairs and all that other stuff. So I missed out on that whole aspect of services, which I regret, but we move on, and I was now public affairs at this point. So it was about 2008, the end of 2008, beginning of 2009, roughly. And that was an interesting career field. I liked it. It was taking pictures and writing stories and trying to tell the good news story that the Air Force has to offer, and ultimately use it as a deterrent to the enemy to say, look, we are capable. We know what we're doing, and this is how we're capable. So I did that for about 6 years, I think.
Here in Connecticut?
Yes. And then I decided to switch largely to gain rank, because at that point I was stuck as a tech sergeant, as an E6. There was no opportunity for me to become a master sergeant. So I was looking for other locations and other career fields that would take me so that I could get my rank. Which is something that's what you have to kind of do in the Guard. Because you have to kind of look for open slots. And not like active duty where...
and that's why you decided to switch to air transportation?
Yes.
When did you do that?
2013. 13, yeah.
At what point did you decide that you were going to stay in
14,
the National Guard
2014.
and make it your career?
There's this point of no return right around 10 years. It's called the hump. So if you hit 10 years, you got to stay. And that was, I think, when I switched my career fields the first time. I was at 8 years in, and they wanted me to enlist for 6, and I was like, okay, I'll enlist for the 6, and that'll put me over the hump. And then there's no point in leaving at this point, so I'll just keep doing that. So there wasn't really any motivation to say I'm gonna stay, other than maybe retirement, or to kind of hang on to what I've already contributed to the Guard. It was one of those things where I always like to tell other people, it's like, if I'm not going to send somebody who hasn't been there through it again, unless I can somehow help them get through it. I guess a more eloquent way to put it is, what's that saying? Where it's like, I'd rather fight 1,000 wars than to have my own children fight one, type deal. So if I stayed in the Guard, at least I could lend my expertise and my experiences to the new generations coming in, even if I don't have another opportunity to deploy, which I may never have another opportunity to deploy. But if they can learn something from what I've done, then I'm still contributing to the war fight. So that's probably why I stayed.
All right, so in 2008, you transferred to the air transportation, and that's what you're doing today?
Yes.
Tell me about that duty and what your responsibilities are.
So as an air transportation specialist, our job is to manifest passengers and cargo for transportation on air mobility aircraft. We here at the base have a specific function too, where we do aerial delivery. So we do the rigging for platforms and other types of delivery systems that are jettisoned out of the back of the C-130 aircraft to simulate supplies such as bullets, food, water, or even trucks. And so our function is to do the rigging for them, to get them all built up so that we can give those to the operators, or the aircraft operations guys, to load them onto the plane and send them out the back. And then we have to go recover those assets and bring them back and do the whole thing all over again. We also do fleet servicing, where we'll go out to the plane and we'll make sure that the latrines are emptied, make sure that the food is being delivered. We coordinate that. We're now back to services. We make sure that the food is getting delivered if there's food required. So we do a lot of that stuff. And then the last function is providing a command and control aspect for all these different functions that we do. So we kind of run ourselves like a small little airport. So between, like, when you go to the airport and there's TSA, that's us. You go out to board the plane, that's us. If you see the guy servicing the plane, that's us. If you see, the cargo being loaded, that's us. So we kind of mimic everything that a airport would do in that aspect.
And are you here on duty? Is it like a typical 9 to 5?
We like to think it's typical 9 to 5, but it doesn't ever happen that way. There's a lot. Aircraft doesn't. When you fly planes, you worry about when you want to get in, not when you're taking off. So as long as the mission fits within the parameters of landing at the time that you need to land for whatever reason, whether it's because the airport's going to close or because some of the small places that we land at, they don't stay open 24 hours. They're only open for a small amount of time. Or, you want to make sure that you get whatever supplies or people that are being carried overseas in country by a certain required date or required time. So you kind of have to back it up from there, and whatever it ends up being, that's when we have to kind of load them. So we've come in before at like 2 a.m. in the morning, and we've had to work from like 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., or we'll come in 5 o'clock in the morning on weekends, sometimes 6 o'clock at night. It depends. It just all depends on what the mission requires.
Normally, if you don't have to back it up for a specific location, would you have weekends off?
Normally, yeah. Yep.
And come in as close to 9 to 5?
Yeah, that's the goal, is to hit 9 to 5. Well, 7 to 4:30.
All right, so the C-130s that you have, that you're working on, that you're in charge of the cargo for, they fly out of your base to go to where? What kind of places will they go?
Most of the stuff that we do is local training missions. I know that we have, I think we've organically sent our own people overseas. So we will do one of those missions every so often, usually within our rotations. But most of it's just local training.
How often during a week would you have training?
What do they fly, about 3 times a week? Or 3 days a week. They fly multiple times within those days. But we try to get at least 2 aerial drops in every week. Whether it's the first time we go around is like with containerized deployment system, the smaller ones, and then the second time is usually later on in the week, and that tends to be the large ones that emulate Humvees or trucks or things like that.
For these practice, where do you drop?
We actually drop at Beanbag Alley over in Westover. Yeah, it's called Beanbag Alley because it's, I guess, one of the longest running areas where you can drop. Yeah, you don't do aerial drop. So we drive up to Westover and we sit out in the drop zone. And we get to see the planes fly over and hold our breath and cross our fingers that nothing malfunctions. Next thing you know, it comes out, chute opens, floats to the ground, we go and collect it.
So then you collect it all and bring it back.
Mm-hmm.
So after the C-30s drop it, they land and
Yep. Then we go.
pick it back up.
Yep. And if they didn't drop it, we have to go out to the plane and collect it off the plane.
Now I understand. Are some of ours from Connecticut? Are C-130s deployed right now?
I think they are. Yeah, I think they are deployed, but I'm not sure where.
So how
Honestly,
many are you in charge of here at this place?
Well, I'm not in charge of the planes at all, but we service 4 of them currently. Yeah.
You're in charge of the loads.
Yes.
If something goes wrong with the loads, that's
Yes.
a problem.
If we're in charge of rigging the loads, so we do a joint inspection or joint aircraft inspection on them with the load masters. So if something goes wrong, yes, that falls on us.
And as part of the rigging, I saw that you have the parachute rigging.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that parachutes for the load, or for the people, or for both?
Well, just for the loads. Yep. We don't actually. We don't pack parachutes for anybody who's jumping out of an aircraft. Usually, life support or depending on the career field, they'll pack their own chutes. But I know that we do support what they call JAT missions. I can't remember the acronym, but it's something like Joint Airborne or Joint Air Assault Teams or something like that, where they'll go and they'll pick up the airborne army and they'll let them jump out the back. So we don't do any of those packing or those chutes. We just do it specifically for cargo.
Josh, were you awarded any medals or citations?
Yes. Off the top of my head, accommodation medals, Air Force Achievement Medal, Outstanding Unit Award with Valor, National Defense Service Medal, Armed Forces Reserve Medal with M device, which means that I deployed, I was mobilized. There's quite a bit other, but I can't remember what they are, to be honest with you, without either looking at my ribbon rack or giving you the sheet, giving you the rip.
Now that you've switched from services to public affairs and air transportation, do you have any regrets?
No. We always have the nostalgia, which sometimes we confuse as regret, but I like to leave it where it's at. I like to think back on it and go, yeah, those are good days. And every once in a while, I'll cross lines. I'll go back and I'll do stuff, or we have events that we have for our morale club here in the organization, and if it requires me to put on lederhosen for our Oktoberfest and cook brats, I'll do it because that's what we've done. So, and if it requires me to take photos of the event or some other event, then I'll do it. But I don't ever want to get back into it full swing. It's one of those things where, again, if I can go over there and I can help someone from the experience or the expertise that I've learned from that area, then I'll do it. And I'll do it just sometimes to, I guess, scratch the itch in a way. Yeah.
What do you see as the next progression in your career?
Retirement. Yeah, I got 3 years left. That's it. Joined when I was 17, and I'm on my 17th year. So 3 years, I'll retire when I'm 37.
In your 17 years in the Air Guard, what do you think would be top of your list for your most memorable experience?
Most memorable experience. Well, if I don't say this, she'll probably kill me. So it's probably meeting my wife, which was very memorable. She's also in the unit, and it's definitely, she's the love of my life, and it's helped because she's in the military. So, we understand what each other is bringing to the table. We also understand what was required of each other. Other than that, it's definitely going to be the first time that I deployed, because it was just, you can't recreate that. And each subsequent experience after that is based on, everything that happened that one time. So even though all the other experiences are awesome in their own right, the experience the first time is probably, that's going to be the most memorable.
At what point in your career did you meet your wife?
That was 2006 roughly. Yeah. So it was in the transition period when I was going.
Back here in Connecticut.
Yeah, when I was going from services over to public affairs.
All right, so now, during all this time, you're missing a lot of semesters of school. What happened to your college education?
Well, see, I was on like the 10-year plan. So, yeah, it gets interrupted a lot. And that's a big thing that I harp on my airmen a lot is get it done. Don't worry about anything else. Even though the Guard mission, you're obligated and you have a duty to it, school is your number one. Get school done, because especially because I worked with like employer support of the Guard and Reserve, and we did a whole stint where we were doing getting jobs and making sure that people had employment and all this other stuff, and it really drove home to me the aspect that your civilian life is more important than your military career, because if you don't have the civilian life, you don't have a military career. We can't effectively rely on you to go overseas and do the mission that you need to do unless you have a solid, base of operations to go back to when you come home. And that makes you a much better warfighter if you have security when you come home. You have a job, you have family that love you, you have a house, you're able to pay the bills. That's the kind of warfighter that we want. We want someone who's not trying to, make their life overseas. We want someone who has a reason to defend their life back home. So it's one thing I hammer with my airmen is education.
Now with your education?
So I finally got my bachelor's a few years back.
In what?
It was in business management, and it was essentially just a way to check that box. I was like, let me just get this done, and then I can focus on doing something that I really want later. Well, later came, and I'm now getting my master's in geography at CCSU, Central Connecticut State University, with a specialty in environmental sustainability.
So when you retire from the Air National Guard, what do you plan on doing?
Getting a real job. And I say it like that because, in a way, this is a fantasy. I mean, especially for like a 19-year-old kid. When you join the military, it's just one of those things where when you're like 9 years old and you're a boy, maybe even if you're a girl, I don't know. I just know the experience from the boy's perspective. I want to save the world. I want to be a hero. I either want to be a fireman or a policeman or military, or I want to do something good. And then you get that opportunity, which a lot of people don't get. And then all of a sudden, you want to hold on to that opportunity for as long as possible. But it's now time for me to move on. So, yeah, it's go back to the real world, get a real job,
So what will your real job be in the field of?
Hopefully in environmental sustainability, doing something with environmental science or geographical information systems, making maps for purposes of, urban development planning, so that's done in a very sustainable way.
Did you form any close friendships while you were in the service now that you'll maintain?
Yeah, definitely. Yep. It'll. I've been thinking about this one for a while because you take it for granted. You see them every day, or you see them once a month because you have to. You're all coming together, so you never really have a need to kind of like reach out and go see them every once in a while. And it's kind of a tragedy, but we don't have the same organizational mindset. I think that a lot of our generations prior did, where we're not joining the VFWs or the American Legions or anything like that. So it's going to be tough to kind of keep up with a lot of the friendships. But some of the most meaningful relationships that I've ever had started in the Guard, and they've always crossed the border between mentor, father figure, best friend, to me being the mentor. It's kind of like this very fluid relationship that you have with a lot of service members, because they have to kind of fulfill multiple roles. Depends on the situation. So yeah, there's definitely there's people that I would want to reach out to, and there's people that I probably don't ever want to give the time of day to again.
How did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
I don't know if I really ever had a concept of war, until it was on my doorstep, and then you're like, oh man. And then you're starting to think. You're like, whoa, okay, so what is war? What is war? And I think the only real thing that I could rely on was we had Vietnam. So we only ever knew Vietnam from my generation. I mean, you had a little bit of a conflict, in South America, and the Berlin Wall coming down. But I think that was still that wasn't quite the conflict that we probably thought that we were going to get ourselves into. So when I got overseas the first time, I remember stepping out of that plane going, okay, this is it. Like, this is, get me my weapon, we're going. And I didn't know what to expect. And then over time, it was like, oh, man, war is very bureaucratic. War is very slow. War is very precise, very deliberate, especially from an air perspective, because that's what we do. We want to hit the right targets at the right time to do the maximum amount of damage and reduce the total number of collateral damage. So you kind of have to take it with, like a slow approach. So it wasn't like this thing that we saw in the movies growing up. Not everyone was pumped up on adrenaline, running through, being in firefights all the time. I mean, a lot of it was just very discreet. But I also think that the shape of war had changed at that point, where subterfuge and terrorism were the new way to come to fight an enemy that you couldn't win against. So there was no need for us to charge the hill, so to speak. There was no need for us to envision war as being this, this like D-Day scenario. It wasn't in our generation at that point. So
Have you joined any veterans organizations?
the VA count? No, I haven't. I mean, I'm part of the VA because that's another thing. Anybody coming back home should be doing that. Um, just if anything, because the Affordable Care Act, you're now covered. You have your health insurance. I am part of ESGR as a volunteer still, so I still do that, which isn't really a veterans organization, but it's more of a service members organization. Yeah, it's one of those things where I know I should be doing it, but again, I don't know what's stopping us. Because I know a lot of my generation too. They're not in charge. Like, they don't go out and they don't do these things, and I'm not sure if I'm not sure why, but yeah, I'm not in any veterans organizations.
What do you do with the ESGR?
So I'm a general volunteer for them. Right now, I do a lot of the things that would be appropriate to the Air Guard, largely because I'm here and I can help get things done for them. But for the most part, it's attending yellow ribbon events, making sure that people who are deploying or coming back from deployment, if they have any issues with their employer, that they can talk to me for advice, that I can direct them to where our case management system is, if they wanted to put a case against their employer, but also just to kind of give them just give them a good heads up and say, hey, if you're deploying, these are the things you kind of want to do. And before you come back, these are also the things you want to do. So it's just talking to the service member directly to make sure that they are aware of both their rights and their employer's rights and each other's responsibilities when a deployment comes up.
How would you say that your service has affected your life?
I'm definitely not the person who I thought I would become or the person who I was. My life personally is much more disciplined, much more structured than I see a lot of my other friends being. I don't freak out about a lot of things, largely because the way that I always frame it is like, once you've been to war, what else do you have to freak out about? There's not a whole lot. So being level-headed allows you to kind of like think through the situation differently, allows you to kind of, handle the responsibility of leadership. So I tend to, I don't know if I would have been that leader had I not joined the military. And I don't know if I would have been, okay with myself, because it's one of those things where, you want to do the best that you can. Like I said, every kid wants to grow up to be a hero. And if it's one of those things where as a 15-year-old boy, I was afraid to go up in front of people and speak about things. I don't have that fear anymore, because that doesn't even come close to the most real fear that I've ever had. But at the same token, I think a lot of people don't realize I'm in the military. I know my kids still don't really get it, even though I wear a uniform every day. They know their mom is, because they're like, "Oh, look, it's mommy's planes," and they're like, "Oh, Dad, he picks us up and drops us off. Dad's not in the military." I'm like, "But I'm wearing the same uniform." I'm like, "No, Dad, you're not in the military."
How many kids?
3. So I have a 16-year-old stepdaughter, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old, all girls. But
And if one of them wanted to join the military, what would your advice be?
Look elsewhere first. It's not that I don't think that they would be good in the military. It's just, in a way, there is a segment of civilian life that you miss out on. You are sacrificing that, and I don't know if I want. And this is just me personally speaking. I don't know if I want my children to have to forego that, that opportunity to do that. But ultimately, it's their decision. If they have the calling and they want to join the military, then that's fine. I mean, I'll be supportive for it the entire time. But my advice then would be, first, just check out other opportunities. Find out what you really want to do in life, and then if the military can help you do that, then sure. But it's not like I'm going to drive my daughters to the recruiting station and say, "Hey, you're signing up." It's not going to happen. So I'll let them make that decision on their own.
Josh, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you've done or you'd like to tell me about? Any other memorable experience or incidents?
Not really. I guess that kind of covers it. The deployment in 2003, and then various TDYs, deployment in 2007, different career fields. Yeah, that's about it.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your service and thank you for sharing your story with us.
No problem.